There's a type of person who one day just disappears. They don't explode, they don't break down, they don't send a long message explaining themselves. They just stop responding, stop showing up, stop being available. And the strangest part, they don't look sad. They look relieved. Most people call them cold, damaged, antisocial. But psychology tells a completely different story. And once you hear it, you might recognize yourself. You probably know someone like this. A friend who slowly became unreachable. A family member who pulled away without any drama. Someone who just made their world smaller. No big fight, no clear reason, no explanation. Just a quiet decision to rebuild their social life from scratch. Psychologists have a name for this pattern. It's called strategic social withdrawal. And what separates this from depression or unhealthy isolation is one very specific thing: clarity, not confusion, not fear, clarity. The people who do this usually know exactly what they're doing, and more importantly, they know why. For years, we've been sold an idea: more connections equal more happiness, more friends, more plans, more presence. But a researcher at Oxford University challenged that idea in a way that changed how we understand human relationships. Robin Dunbar spent decades studying social structures across cultures, and what he found was simple and uncomfortable. The human brain has a real capacity for genuine relationships, around 5 to 15 people in your inner circle. The rest? Noise, not neutral noise. Noise that costs you cognitive energy, emotional bandwidth, and real time from your life. And there are certain people, especially those with high emotional sensitivity, who reach a point where they feel that weight with brutal clarity, not as a theory, as a physical experience. Every empty conversation, every social event they attend out of obligation, every relationship they maintain out of habit, not choice. At some point, something inside them says, enough. In 2019, researcher Thuy-vy Nguyen published a study in the Journal of Personality that reframed how we think about chosen solitude. Her key finding: voluntary solitude, solitude that is chosen, not imposed, produces a state of deep deactivation in the central nervous system. In plain terms, the brain resets in a way that passive rest simply cannot achieve. People who practiced intentional solitude regularly showed lower cortisol levels, greater emotional clarity, and significantly better decision-making in the days that followed. It wasn't sadness, it was restoration. And this explains something that people who've gone through this phase describe in almost identical words. For the first time in years, I could actually hear myself think. The problem is the stigma. Our culture treats isolation as failure, as giving up, as breaking down. But there is an enormous difference between withdrawing out of fear and stepping back out of clarity. And the person who does it from clarity doesn't need anyone to understand. So what do these people actually have in common? Researchers consistently identify 3 traits. First, high self-awareness. They don't act on impulse. They've been quietly observing their own relationships for a long time, noticing patterns, tracking how they feel after certain conversations, after certain people, and at some point the internal evidence becomes impossible to ignore. Second, a low tolerance for inauthenticity. People who cut everyone off tend to be incapable of sustaining surface-level relationships over time, not because they're arrogant, but because the emotional cost of performing, of pretending to care, pretending to enjoy, pretending to connect, is simply too high for them. They would rather sit in honest silence than in dishonest company. Third, they already tried. This is the most misunderstood part. People assume that whoever walks away never said anything, never tried to change things, just ran. But in most cases, there were conversations, there were attempts, there were expectations, followed by repeated evidence that those expectations wouldn't be met. The withdrawal isn't the first move, it's the last one. Now here's the uncomfortable part. When someone disappears from your life, sometimes you are the reason. Not because you're a bad person, but because there were dynamics that slowly drained their emotional resources. relationships where they were always giving more than they received, conversations that were always about you, friendships that existed only when it was convenient. I'm not saying this to accuse anyone. I'm saying it because psychology is clear on this. The majority of strategic social withdrawals have a specific relational trigger, and the person who leaves usually knows exactly what it was. What varies is whether they tell you. Most don't, not because they can't, because they already did, and nothing changed. So what do we do with all of this? If you're someone who is pulled away, or who is thinking about it, psychology doesn't call that failure. It calls it selection. Human beings aren't built to maintain dozens of deep connections. We're built to protect the few that actually matter. And sometimes to find those few, you first have to create space. If you're someone that a person stopped responding to, instead of taking it as rejection, ask yourself one honest question. What kind of presence was I in that person's life? That question, answered honestly, is worth more than any explanation they could give you, because chosen solitude isn't the end of something, it's the beginning of something more honest. If this made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more content like this every week, subscribe. We'll be here.